Okay, so look at that title. This episode is called The Freakishly Obvious Relevance of Marxism in Today's World. So I've done some episodes that are similar to this, but I think this time it's going to be more in depth and more specific. I'm going to have more real life examples of how Marxism can be seen as relevant to today. So, welcome to Critical Weight Theory, the podcast where sometimes we look at theory and practice, and we're doing a deep dive into the theories that shape our world and explore their practical implications. So, I'm your host, Wade, and today we're delving into the enduring relevance of Marxist theory in our contemporary world. We'll be examining how Marx's ideas from the 19th century continue to resonate in today's economic, political, and social landscapes. So let's get started, and I'll break this down into different segments. So segment one, it's just about me explaining how you can continuously improve your understanding of Marxism. And, you know, there has to be a little bit of a caveat here. When I'm talking about how Marx is relevant, does that mean that I agree with every single thing that Marx might have argued? Or, of course, that Stalin might have done, or something like that? No, of course not. We're talking about, in many cases, some very broad theories and observations that were made and that were historically relevant at the time, and of course, as I'm arguing now, still relevant in many ways. And to begin, if you've been interested in this, if you're keen on deepening your knowledge of Marxist theory or anything related to it, a great way to start is by reading more of Marx's works and participating in conversations, maybe even seminars or meetings where Marxism is actively discussed. I'm sure you're not always going to be able to do that if you're like living in some rural area or some such thing like that. But, some of you out there might be able to do this. And if you can, I guess go right on ahead. Remember, as I suggested earlier, to discuss Marx or I guess any other socialist or communist thinker doesn't mean you have to agree with every little thing that they say. You're potentially even critically analyzing what they're saying, maybe even trying to debunk certain claims being made. That's what philosophy allows, although you're supposed to be actually truthful in philosophy as well and acknowledge when even somebody you disagree with might have a factual point. And, they might be surprisingly relevant to a given situation. So, engaging with others who are also exploring these ideas can provide new insights and a richer understanding of the theory or theories in question. So, now let's talk about why Marxist theory, which developed over 150 years ago, still holds weight today. So, this is going to be segment two. I'm going to call it Income Inequality and Wealth Concentration. What exactly is relevant about that? Well, one of the most striking areas where Marxist theory proves its relevance is in the realm of income inequality and wealth concentration. Marx predicted that capitalism would lead to a growing disparity between the wealthy and the poor, and this is clearly evident in our world today. So this is one of the most obvious points that we could look at to see how Marx and, related thinkers would be relevant to today's world. So, for instance, reports by organizations like Oxfam frequently highlight how a small fraction of the population controls a disproportionate share of global wealth and therefore or thereby social power as well. The so-called elephant curve of income distribution shows that while the wealthy have seen their fortunes grow, many in the middle and lower income brackets have not benefited proportionately. And if you really want to be like a hyper annoying Marxist, you might want to ask why are there different income brackets to begin with? That almost sounds like a structure of some kind. That we're even perceiving society as being different brackets. Like, doesn't that sound a little bit of a questionable thing? Well, that's how Marxism was able to take off, because some people out there, well, many people out there were able to see that and say, hey, that's kind of messed up. And sure enough, I think it's pretty easy to look at that general scenario, that framework, and say, are some people being screwed over here? And on that note, the rapid increase in the number of billionaires and their influence over politics and the economy exemplifies Marx's concept of the bourgeoisie accumulating capital at the expense of the proletariat. So if you don't know what those words mean, I encourage you to look them up. They're not really that difficult to define, but it's basically another word for rich versus poor, with the bourgeoisie basically representing the wealthy and the proletariat being the poor. So anyway, we're moving on to the third segment here: labor exploitation and working conditions. Also relevant to today's world. So let's move on to labor exploitation and working conditions. Marx's concerns about the dehumanization of workers are reflected in today's gig economy, along with the traditional aspects of the economy. Many workers face precarious work conditions with no job security and few benefits. A gig worker might say, I tend to get a minimum target of how much I should get by the end of the day. As soon as I get my target, that's it. I'm done for the day. So that's a quote from a CNN article on gig workers. And that's kind of the mentality of a lot of gig workers. I'm not trying to make fun of them. I mean, I've had gigs myself. In fact, a job itself is a bit like a gig. And, some of us hop from one job to the next, which isn't necessarily different from how things have been historically. There have always been people who have been laid off and just had bad luck, so they kind of de facto were in a situation where it was like they were in a gig economy at the time. I, I've lived those kind of stories on myself, so this part is relevant to me. So, moreover, poor working conditions and low wages in factories in developing countries producing goods for multinational corporations continue to exemplify the exploitation of labor that Marx described. So, we're moving on to segment 4 now, which is economic crises and capitalist instability. So, another area where Marx's analysis shines is in the inherent instability of capitalist economies. The 2008 financial crisis, which I was around for, and subsequent economic turmoil resonate with Marx's predictions about the cyclical nature of capitalist economies. The boom and bust cycles we witness time and time again underscore the instability Marx warned about, as seen in repeated economic recessions and depressions. So no big surprise that that's relevant, right? I mean, that's even a non-Marxist economist would have to give him that one. So segment 5, political power and class struggle. Marx's ideas about political power and class struggle are also highly relevant today. The significant influence of wealthy individuals and corporations on political processes through lobbying and campaign contributions reflects Marx's idea of the ruling class shaping the state to serve its interests. And of course, that's often above the interests of the ordinary, working class doofus out there, the type of person who would work in the gig economy. And social movements like Occupy Wall Street and campaigns for higher minimum wages demonstrate ongoing class struggles and resistance against economic injustices. And that's exactly why, if you remember at the time, Occupy Wall Street was so mocked and ridiculed. It's not necessarily because they were wrong or even that they had the wrong approach. It was just the general concept of people living, in a semi-rebellious manner, and trying to have something outside the rigid confines of capitalism and consumer culture. They were intentionally disruptive, and they kind of reminded people that, hey, another way is possible, and you're not supposed to do that. Obviously, the Occupy Wall Street thing was not a rip-roaring success. I'm not claiming it was, but that's not the reason why it was attacked. It was attacked merely because people were, however successfully or otherwise, trying to live independently of, the system, as it were. So the media went after them, and it would do so for really just about any sort of deviation from the capitalist religion. So, that's one way in which Marxist theory is relevant yet again. If you're trying to live in some way that's a little bit outside of the overarching class structure, they're going to, lob mental grenades at you. And maybe it could even get to actual violence. That's happened at times as well when it comes to any sort of display of, disobedience. So moving on to, I believe this is segment 6, global capitalism and imperialism. So on a global scale, Marxist theory helps us understand phenomena like neocolonialism, the economic domination of poorer countries by richer ones through mechanisms like debt and multinational corporations, can be seen as a continuation of the imperialist tendencies Marx identified. Resource exploitation from developing countries for the benefit of developed nations is a clear example of this dynamic. So I have to ask, where's Marx really been that goofy at this point? All of these things I've mentioned were truly things that Marx would have, mentioned. And in a way he did, although of course with a different cast of characters and the world was definitely different, but still the same. As that saying goes, the more things change, the more they stay the same. Well, it's true when we talk about these issues as well. So, segment 7, this might be the most depressing one. Alienation. So, modern workers often experience alienation, a key concept in Marxist theory. Many feel disconnected from the products of their labor and see their work as merely a means to an end rather than something satisfying or fulfilling. Additionally, the emphasis on consumerism and material wealth in our society leads to social alienation as individuals struggle to find meaning and community in a highly commodified world. Basically, if you don't have money, you're less of a person in this system. And that's quite often how it goes, As I used to know back when I was debating more in political forums, if you're poor enough, eventually some cop is going to show up from somewhere and tell you to move it along. And I think that's pretty much true. I haven't really had any significant reason to amend that sentiment. Although, of course, there are attempts to reform the system, make it less brutal, and all that kind of stuff, and there has been some success. But at the same time, there are definitely also attempts to make it more brutal and more of a class warfare of the rich against the poor. Then that includes cutting social welfare benefits and of course making life more expensive by intentionally raising costs and lowering wages. Just sort of mockingly putting up hurdles for people who don't have as much money or resources. That's one of the sort of cruel games that some of these cultural figures play on, like Fox News and places like that. Like I remember John Stossel even did a segment on how basically nobody's truly homeless or something like that in the United States, or just some type of messaging like that. That's basically the gist of what he was saying at the time, and that's really about as vicious as any of the other type of Fox News hosts like Tucker Carlson. If you really think about it, there's something really vicious about doing that. Like, it's also a denial of reality because, of course, if you've lived any kind of life, you've probably seen homeless people, and it's not like they're all just putting on an act. And if you think that, well, you're just fucking delusional. But anyway, segment 8 now. Environmental degradation. So environmental degradation is another critical issue where Marxist theory is insightful. Imagine that. So the relentless pursuit of profit in capitalist economies often leads to environmental harm, including deforestation and climate change, and pollution and smog and all kinds of fun stuff like that. So Marxists argue that these issues are inherent in the capitalist mode of production, which prioritizes profit over sustainability and quite often public health. So, I don't. Yet again, where's the Marxist theory wrong exactly? Could you point that out to me? Feel free to go ahead and give it a try. I'd be very much willing to entertain your argument. I mean, I might scoff at it, but go ahead and give it a try. Leave a comment when this shows up on YouTube, and maybe I'll even make a video on your comment if it's actually compelling enough. But anyway, moving on to segment 9, technological change and automation. Now this one is interesting. And let's discuss technological change and automation in this context. So advances in technology can lead to job displacement and unemployment, which Marx predicted as capital's tendency to reduce labor costs through mechanization. So really, I don't truly mean this, but in a way, Marx almost sounds like he's prophetic when it came to that. In fact, a writer named Olivia Goldhill noted in Quartz on May 5th, 2018, 160 years ago, she said, at a time when the light bulb was not yet invented, Karl Marx predicted that robots would replace humans in the workplace. Once adopted into the production process of capital, Marx wrote, the means of labor passes through different metamorphoses, whose culmination is the machine, or rather an automatic system of machinery. So that was one of Marx's notes. And well, again, where was he wrong about that? I think we're seeing that right now. And that's why there are some calls for, a universal basic income. It's not just because, The workforce is so lazy or whatever. And it's not even that nobody actually wants to do any type of work, but we're truly in an economy right now where the advancement of technology is making life more dysfunctional and truly is a threat to not just workforce, but really the system itself. you know, like the social stability factor has to come into play here. Like how stable is a system where people are expected to work, maybe not all the time, but much of the time, yet at the same time there is a growing trend to put people out of work. That is a very stark contradiction, and it's something that Marx noted for a long time. I mean, I know he died at a certain point. He's not alive today, but his theories are still relevant, and that's really the key point here. So, the control of new technologies by a small elite echoes Marx's concerns about the concentration of productive forces in the hands of a few. And really, it seems like, you know, any meaningful change in how things are done to improve people's lives will require challenging the concentration of those productive forces and sort of wresting it away from the hands of the few and allowing the hands of the many to hold the reins of the economy and the political system, or whatever you want to call it, just society in general and its institutions such as they are. So anyway, that is about it for this episode. I'm going to start wrapping things up. I think I went over a lot. I hope you got some food for thought here. And as we've seen, Marxist theory provides a critical framework for analyzing many of the pressing issues we face today, from income inequality and labor exploitation to political power dynamics and environmental degradation. So there's a lot of stuff that you could assess through a Marxist lens, for lack of a better word. Marx's ideas continue to offer valuable insights into the power structures and economic systems that shape our world. So thank you for joining me on critical weight theory. And be sure to subscribe if you're on YouTube and you see this video and you enjoy it. Or even if you don't like it, what the hell, subscribe anyway. And tune in next time as I explore more theories and their impacts on our lives, or maybe it'll just be a lowly movie review or something. We'll see what I conjure up. So until then, keep questioning and keep learning. And yeah, that about does it. Have a good one.